at that time, that meant that it's sometimes called the Papal Revolution. It was a consolidation of power by the church into a central, universalizing political and economic and military power. And this raised the church to a status and a power within Europe that was unprecedented, and that gave it license really to consolidate European identity and life around the identity of being Christian, but and developed a canon law system that was pervasive and widespread. That they established a hierarchy and a bureaucracy that spread throughout Europe that was very multi-leveled, hierarchical. The Pope became the arbiter of feudal rulers who could rule or not, and the popes really set the policy of Europe during the next couple hundred years. One of the things that came out of that period was one of the Crusades was against the Cathars in southern France, an alternative sect, and they were pretty well exterminated. But the church didn't think that they were exterminated, thought that there were some of them hiding in the mountains and things like that, and they were undercover, and so they set up the Inquisition initially to root out Cathars and other heretics. At the same time, the crusade that really reclaimed Spain and Portugal from the Muslims, the Moors, forced a lot of Jews and Muslims to convert or to flee, and many fled, but many converted. And part of the Inquisition was to root out false converters, Jews and Muslims who had not seriously converted. But the church, the Inquisition, didn't believe the converts. If they had converted falsely, then they could still be false. So they said that anybody whose grandparents were Jews or Muslims were still considered tainted. And then, very subsequently after that, they decided that, well, anybody with any Jewish blood or any Moorish blood was tainted and could not be a real Christian. And the phrase was that they didn't have the limpieza de sangre, the cleanness of the blood, or puro. They weren't puro de sangre. They weren't pure-blooded. We use this term pure blood, and that became therefore a biological test. I mean, that was the same test that Hitler used, right? The beginning of modern racism comes out of the Christian attempt to purify the Christian kingdom of all non-Christians. So the Inquisition was set up. It was a vast bureaucracy throughout Europe. One of the things over the centuries the church had not been able to do was to actually instigate Christianity into the daily lives of people in Europe. As they conquered and converted Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, Ireland, and all around, they created a superstructure, but people's daily practices were still pretty pagan and village-centered and earth-centered. And so the Inquisition set up a system to monitor people's daily practices and their beliefs, and to train people to monitor each other. So there was a separate set of crimes that had to do with not reporting your family members and your neighbors for being false converts or eventually witches or heretics, that in fact you were in as much danger as anybody else if you did not report somebody who turned out to be a witch or a heretic of some sort. And that meant that the community was policing itself. Family members were turning in each other, neighbors were turning in each other. It became a system in which Christianity became part of the way people had to live their everyday lives because the penalties were so huge. And when I mean the penalties were so huge, literally tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people were accused of and brought in front of the Inquisition. Many of them were tortured. All of them were suspect and had to be shunned, because if you associated somebody who was under surveillance or under investigation, you could be also brought in. This whole system, if you were found to be a heretic or a witch or whatever, you were either hung or burned at the stake in a vast public spectacle. So this wasn't just something that was done quietly in a secret prison. This was something that the entire community was forced, mandated to come out and watch, including all of the children, while a woman was burned at the stake for being a witch, or while a Jew or a Muslim was tortured and hung for being subversive. So, and the Inquisition lasted about 500 years, rolling waves, again, moving through Europe in different parts at different times, but hundreds of years of vast public spectacles, somewhat like lynching became in the United States in the South in the first 30 or 40 years of this century, in which everybody was terrorized, including children, by these public spectacles of what happened to people who did not follow the orthodox view of Christianity. 500 years is a long time. The last 250 of that, women in particular, were targeted. Tens of thousands were killed, at least. We don't even know how many. And the thing, I think there's two things that we have to think about. One is, what is the impact on our lives today of the history of the Crusades and the Inquisition and the violence that was done and the groups that were vulnerable to that? How does that, filter into our lives? How does that determine our foreign policy, our domestic policy, the Patriot Act, the McCarthy era, things like that? The other thing that was happening at the same time that's really intertwined with this was that the mandate to spread Christianity throughout the world was a central mandate of the entire Christian empire, right? So this is the period when colonization began. And the Pope was very clear that this was a religious enterprise. And there was a series of papal statements that both mandated, rewarded, and exalted those who went out and colonized the world. And so I want to read you just a short paragraph from one of these bulls, papal statements that were influential throughout the kingdom. The Pope allowed Christian rulers, quote, free and ample facility, or faculty, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, i.e. Muslims, and pagans, everybody else, whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ, wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit. This was, it was called Romanus Pontifex in 1455. This was before Columbus went out and any of the others.